delighted you're here today. With the defeat of Amendment 7 in the past election, we were pleased with that outcome simply because we thought it was bad policy, the way it was framed and the issue itself, bad policy. But we understand that there is a need, obviously, to fund our roads and fund transportation in the state of Missouri. So it occurred to us, after that election was over, what do we do now? How does MoDOT get the necessary funds to move forward? What do we do about transportation in the state of Missouri, which, of course, we all have a stake in? So we thought it would be nice to have a discussion and have some experts to deal with that. And so we're delighted that our guests have decided to appear here with us. Greg Horn is the MoDOT District Engineer. He is going to speak first in just a moment. Len Toenjes is the President of the Associated General Contractors of St. Louis. And Joseph Miller is our policy researcher here at the Show Me Institute and has written extensively about transportation and also had a lot to say about Amendment 7 vis-a-vis the policy aspects of it. So our plan here is to have each of these gentlemen make a few comments, talk for about 10 minutes each, and then we'll open it up to questions and try and get a good discussion going. But first and foremost, Greg, please.
Great. Well,
lead
thank
us
you.
off.
Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I always like to start off, though, talking about our system, because a lot of people don't understand it. We have 33,000 miles of highways on our system. That's the 7th largest in the United States. We actually have more state highways in Missouri than Illinois and Kansas combined. We have over 10,000 bridges. That ranks us 6th in the nation in bridges, and we have more major river bridges than anybody else. We have 125 airports, 25 public river ports, so we're a huge system. During the last 2 years, MoDOT has been working on our long-range plan. What we've been doing is looking at our 20-year vision, and we've done something a little bit different. We've been going out and asking the people of Missouri, what do they want out of their transportation system? We've been to all 114 counties, 234 communities. You know, we've been to coffee shops, sporting events. I spent some time at the Ferguson Farmers Market last year, handing out surveys, talking to people, asking them, what do they want out of the transportation system? We had got over 12,000 comments, so it was pretty robust. And there was 4 things that resounded pretty clearly. The citizens of Missouri want us to maintain our system and services that we have today. That's pretty much a given, and I would expect that. They also want us to continue our safety initiatives. You know, Missouri is one of the leading states in reducing fatalities on our highway system over the last 5 years. And so the people of Missouri have seen that. They want us to continue to do that. People also want us to invest in projects that spur economic growth and create jobs, which has surprised me. I know that you guys probably understand it, but I didn't know that, you know, sitting at the coffee shop, people can relate, you know, transportation to jobs. And then last of all, people want, it's not just about your car anymore. They want us to invest in other modes of transportation. You know, transit, they want us to invest in bike and trail. So those are the 4 things that the Missourians want out of the transportation system. So they also gave us a lot of projects that they think we needed. And so we put a dollar amount to those projects. And there's $70 billion worth of wants and needs that Missourians want, okay? Here's our problem. We have about $14 billion over the next 20 years with our current funding situation to fill those $70 billion worth of needs. So you can see there's this huge gap. On top of that, our funding is dropping. You know, we had about $1.3 billion. I'm sorry, yeah, $1.3 billion over the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years for construction. Okay, that number has gone down to $700 million this year, and it's going down to $325 million by 2017. So that's a problem. You know, there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of reasons why that's happening. I mean, 3, 4, 5 years ago, we had ARA funds, that was American Recovery Act funds from the federal government. We also paying back some bonds for some you know, big projects like the Mississippi River Bridge and the I-64 project and Safe and Sound. But those are pretty small. The biggest issue that we have is that 70% of our funds for transportation come through a gas tax. Okay, so that's a pretty big amount that comes through a gas tax, and that hasn't changed in 20 years. Okay, and people are becoming less dependent on fuel. Think about it. The car that you drove 15 years ago probably got 15 miles to the gallon. You know, the car that if you buy a car in the last couple of years, it probably gets 25, 30 miles to the gallon. You buy a car in 5 years, it's going to be getting 45 to 50 miles a gallon. So don't get me wrong, that's great for the environment, that, you know, people are less dependent on fuel, but you can't fund your transportation system the way we have in the past. We have, on top of all this, we know that it takes $485 million just to maintain the system in the condition it is today. And the, you know, the condition is okay. I mean, we have like 82% of our major highways are in good condition, about 67% of our minors are in good condition. But it takes $485 million to maintain that system, and when, in 2017, when it drops to $325 million, we are not going to be able to maintain the system that we have currently. What does that mean? That means we are not going to continue the safety initiative. I mentioned earlier that we're one of the leading states in reducing fatalities in our system over the last 5 years. That wasn't by accident. You know, I mean, what we did over the last 5 years is we invested in guard cable down the center of the highway, rumble stripes, bigger signs, shoulders on these curvy roads, and we can't continue that trend without, you know, without funding. What else does that mean? You know, we have, you know, our roads and bridges are just going to start deteriorating. And you won't drive on an unsafe bridge in Missouri because we'll close it first. But as we move forward, there will be times that we will have to just consider whether we can open these bridges or not, whether we have the funds to do that. Now, MoDOT has seen this coming for the last 5 years. You know, we've been seeing, you know, this is going to be an issue, actually longer than that. And we've taken a lot of steps internally. We've reduced our staff by 1,200 people. We've reduced from 10 districts down to 7 districts, which was huge. You know, we sold off 34 buildings, 750 pieces of equipment. And we saved $500 million, and we put that back into the road system. But you can't solve the funding issue by cutting our MoDOT. And we're basically right now at our core. You know, we have to, in order to plow snow, I mean, it's all hands on deck. We have our professional engineers out there during the snow season plowing snow because we're so thin right now. So, you know, the other thing that people need to understand is that MoDOT is an implementing agency, okay? Our job is to be as efficient as we can with the money that we have. And it's really up to the legislators, it's up to the governor, and it's up to the people of Missouri to decide how to fund transportation. It's our job to identify, here's the needs, and do that, and it's up to really everybody else to figure out how to do that, and we'll do the best we can with the money we have. So as we move forward, that's exactly what we're going to do, what we've always done, be as efficient as we can with the money that we have. And we thank you for having forums like this. This is great, so we can talk about this and get the word out there and figure out how to fund transportation.
Mr. Horn, thank you. Mr. Toenjes.
Thank you, Rick. My name's Len Toenjes. I'm president of Associated General Contractors of St. Louis. We represent approximately 350 construction-related firms in the St. Louis region. I'll go back several years ago. Greg said that MoDOT saw this coming a number of years ago when Steve Tilley was the Speaker of the House. Steve appointed what he called a blue ribbon panel to go around the state and look at what transportation, what should be done, statewide transportation. So there were, I think, about 12 or 13 of us who were appointed by Steve, and we went around the state, did a series of hearings, Hannibal, Cape Girardeau, St. Louis, Columbia, and it could almost write the script for each one of these. First, the MoDOT engineer would come and have a chart to show all the projects that MoDOT was going to do. Secondly, the person from the Chamber of Commerce would get up and talk about the projects that they needed for economic development in their region. Maybe somebody from the school district would get up and talk about what needed to be done to get the kids to school safely. We'd go through all this, and then at the end of the thing, Dwayne Mickey, who at that time was a commissioner for MoDOT, would ask the folks sitting like this, well, this is great. We'd like to know how you think we ought to pay for this. And the tone of the entire meeting would change then to shock and awe. You know, oh, well, like Steve said, or Greg said, you know, we're looking at billions of dollars of wants and needs, so we try to carve out the wants from the needs. And I think that what we've seen since that time is that the needs have remained, But there is, as I think Amendment 7 showed us, no collaborative direction on how to pay for this, what we all want, or what we need, frankly. I think what Amendment 7 showed us in the aftermath of this, my experience in talking with folks, we did a lot of polling. I was on the planning committee that looked at how this whole thing should go together. And frankly, the half-cent sales tax, or it started as I'll go back. We did a half-cent sales tax with some gas tax, with some this, with some that, back when Neil St. Onge was the chair of the Transportation Committee. That failed because it was too confusing for people. They couldn't understand all this different mishmash of things. So this time around we thought, well, let's try a single focus. Should we toll? The polling on that was terrible. Should we raise the gas tax? The polling on that was terrible. Should we try a sales tax? The polling on that was minimal, maybe, might go. So given those options, we thought, well, let's go with the one that has, frankly, policy aside, the strongest chance of going anywhere at the ballot box. What we found out, I think, in the aftermath, and I think as people have come up to me afterwards, I think we know now that 40% of the people will vote for a sales tax. How do the other 60% go? I think we've got a percentage that think the state has plenty of money already. We should take it out of existing state funds. Let's take it from education or social programs or wherever, conservation, you name it. There's a group of people who think tolling is a great idea. We ought to toll so that the truckers pay. Okay? Or there's a group that think the gas tax ought to happen. The people who are for the sales tax, the people who are against it obviously take the regressive. It's regressive. It drives business out. It's not a fair approach. The people who like the tolling think, well, that's great. The truckers will pay for it. And I'm thinking, well, I doubt if the truckers are going to take that out of their own pocket. Something tells me that cost is going to be passed along to everybody in the state for anything they might purchase. The people who think we ought to raise the gas tax, a lot of those folks are the same folks that think we need a total transportation system, not realizing that the Missouri State Constitution limits gasoline taxes for roads and bridges only. It cannot go to transit, it can't go to ports, it can't go to rail, it can't go to all these other needs that we talk about. And so we're sort of in this conundrum where everybody agrees that there's a need. One of my contractors called me and, well, actually, so everybody agrees on the need. We've got this split approach to how we ought to pay for it. At the Amendment 7 watch party, which we had down at the chamber, late in the evening when it was pretty apparent that the best thing of the evening was the open bar.
Always is.
At that point, my legislative vice president for governmental affairs said, boy, she said, a lot of our contractors are going to go out of business now because of this. And I said, no, Denise, they're not going out of business, they're going out of state. And that's exactly what's happening. Fabic Tractor, who sells equipment to all these guys, representative from there said, I was talking to one of my customers and the guy said, well, I've got 2 pieces of paper on my desk that I thought I'd never have to sign, but I'm going to have to sign them now. One is my application for my business license in Arkansas. The other is my application for my business license in Oklahoma, because that's where I'm going to work. Pace Construction out here on Woodson Road, guys on our board of directors, they're running all over Arkansas right now. He spends more time in Arkansas than he spends in Missouri anymore. I think we know what's happening with Millstone Weber. Those two firms merged. Frankly, I think they're making money on the materials side of things, selling rock, but they're not making any money building anything right now. They bought a company in Texas. They're working down there. So I, like Greg, am elated to have a chance to come and talk about where do we go from here, because frankly, this is Len talking, I'm out of ideas. I'm out of ideas on how to get a disparate group of people with all these different interests and different ideas to get enough folks in any one camp to be able to move the state forward.
Mr. Toenjes, thank you very much. Joseph?
Well, I want to thank my fellow panelists for being here today, and we've heard a lot about sort of the need for the highway system, and I think that was a really good overview of sort of the political situation. And I'm just going to use my presentation time to talk about how we can move forward with funding the system with user fees. We've always argued here that those are the most economically sound ways of moving forward, and those are the fairest ways of moving forward. And I just wanted to point out here, and hopefully I'll be able to convince you, that a gas tax and tolling, they are possible solutions for funding the state highway system in particular. So here you see a graph basically from 2014 to 2019 of where the revenue streams for MoDOT. And I want to point out that we hear a lot about how the fuel tax is really something that's just going down over time, and it's a big problem, and people are driving less, and that's going to mean less revenue. And that's certainly true. It's been falling at since 2008 at about 1.3% per year. But really, the issue and the reason why we're going to go below $485 million, which is the construction budget that is needed to maintain just a sufficient infrastructure. The reason why that's happening is because we're losing federal dollars, not necessarily because of the gas tax money. And the reason for that is because projects aren't being added to the state improvement program. And the state improvement program, if you don't add projects to that, you can't get federal dollars, so you can't get the matching dollars. So in a sense, what's happened is we had $10 before, but because we can't spend $6, we can't get the extra $4, so we go down to 6 instead of just going down to 9 by losing $1. So there's good news and there's bad news to this. The good news is that if reduction in federal funds is your problem, you can get back those federal funds if you can just raise enough state revenue to meet the matches. And a lot of what MoDOT does is 80-20 splits. So if you go through the state improvement project and the things that they have on their list coming up, a lot of them are 80-20 splits. So the federal government's going to provide 80%. MoDOT just has to provide 20%. Not all of them are like that, but a lot of them are. So they need to raise that amount of money to get that back. More good news is that thanks to the efforts of MoDOT over the last decade, including the bond issuances and also the use of the federal stimulus money, the highway system is in pretty good shape now, especially when you compare it to other places in the country, other states. So we're not broke and falling apart. We're just simply broke. So we don't have to panic and just choose any sort of project. The bad news is that what I just said, if you just go in and raise enough gasoline tax money or you raise the sales tax money just to get the federal money back, you run into the problem that there are these huge multi-billion-dollar projects that are going to come from the state over time. The most pressing of those is I-70, which the most recent study I saw MoDOT put out, I think the preferred plan was a $4 billion plan. So that's extremely expensive, and you're not going to be able to get that back just by maintaining a $700, $800 million a year construction budget. So, gasoline tax. What you can see here is how the gasoline tax revenue, these are just MoDOT's projections that I've just sort of put on a graph here. You can see that the total gallons of fuel, the bars, are going down over time. They were just under 4 billion in 2013. And they're going to go down to closer to 3.5 billion in 2020 if the decline that we have continues. Now, it could go faster, it could go slower. I mean, consumption could go up. I mean, these are things that it's hard to tell. I think most likely, though, is the projections of a slow decline over time. So that means the total fuel tax revenue, of which 73% currently goes to MoDOT, is declining, you can see up here, slowly. And then the revenue to MoDOT is declining again. So this is just what it looks like if you raise the gasoline tax by 5 cents. With no fuel tax revenue, what happens to the fuel tax over time is it obviously declines slightly. But you get if you just raise the gas tax by 5 cents, you can get over $100 million of extra revenue. And that, even with MoDOT projections, and you can see sort of the bends in the line is from just adding in standard elasticities for the short term and the long term, what raising 5 cents would do under current conditions to gasoline consumption. You can see that that's gonna raise revenue over even the baseline here by just under 100 million. So it is possible to raise revenue from the gasoline tax. It definitely, over the very long term, once we start looking at 10, 20 years, it's no longer going to be the stable source of revenue that it is now. But certainly when we're talking about 5 years, maybe even within 10 years, it's definitely a place that you can look. Another solution, obviously, is tolling. We've heard about some of the polling issues with tolling. One of the other issues is legal issues. So according to the current interpretation of the Missouri Constitution, MoDOT can't set up a toll authority. Although I believe it is MoDOT's position that if a toll road were financed and operated by a private company, that it would be legal, although I'm not a lawyer here, so that would obviously have to be hashed out by other people. And tolling is an excellent user fee. The people who use the roads pay for the roads. It's something that has a lot of utility. So in urban areas, you can actually use tolls to control congestion. So if you improve I-70 in Kansas City or St. Louis, you can set up a variable toll system so that you don't have to just expand it once traffic starts to become more congested. You can simply raise the toll a little bit higher to maintain free flow. Also, these are not the tolls that you might have seen when you were younger. New toll systems have open road tolling, so you can just pass straight through if you have a transponder. Some of them will even just check your license plate. When I was in Illinois just a couple weeks ago, I didn't have an I-Pass, and I didn't have enough money for the booth. So I just went through the open lane tolling, and then you can go online later, put in what your license plate was, and pay the toll online. So there's a lot of efficiency there. There's a lot of things you can do with it. Of course, there are the political reasons why people might not like it. And there's a lot of concerns about double taxation and simply the fact that it's not going to be, they're never coming out. So you hear a lot of people say, well, they'll put the tolls in, they'll say they're going to pay for the road, and the tolls will never leave. And in a lot of places that's true, although not everywhere. Kentucky actually did take out their toll booths after they paid off the roads. So I think there are a number of ways you could put forward policy solutions that might be more appetizing to people. You could guarantee the money stayed with the road. You could have a rebate on gasoline tax for people who use the road to avoid double taxation. And you could guarantee that all the money was just spent on maintenance and repairing and building, and it could come out afterwards. And you might also want to limit it because, I mean, it's not going to be a feasible solution for everything. So you could rebuild I-70 with this, and there's going to be enough revenue for that. You could rebuild Broadway Bridge in Kansas City, which in fact used to be a toll road. You could definitely do those types of projects, but this isn't going to work for everything. So even if you tolled I-70 and tolled some of the major bridges and roads in the state, you would still need to find another source of revenue to handle those 33,000 lane miles, those 10,000 bridges that we just talked about. So I hope I've convinced you that these are ways of moving forward. We can use user fees. These are just a couple of them, but that we don't have to reach for policy solutions that are either unfair or economically unsound, and that there are other ways of going about it. And I guess now we'll open up to questions.
Thank you, all three of you. Do you two have any comments on what Joseph just said? I would like to get things started by saying, okay, why not toll? It didn't apparently poll well, and there are some legal hurdles, I guess, that we have to overcome, but what's MoDOT's position on this? Does MoDOT think that tolling is a good way to go,
There
potentially?
again, MoDOT is an implementing agency, so we don't really talk about, how we fund it. That's not our job, and actually we can actually get in trouble for saying, here's how we should do this. But, you know, any revenue source that we have is good. And, you know, we would love to have, you know, tolling as a tool in our toolbox to use. I mean, we'd love to have whatever it is. I mean, I don't think we have an issue with that.
I think tolling would be an excellent solution, I really do, because as we move to alternative fuel vehicles, you know, you said you were up in Illinois, you know, drive through Chicago, all the concrete trucks are switched over to CNG now, so they're putting a hell of a lot of wear and tear on the system and not paying anything. So some system that does, you know, tolling does in a way capture vehicle miles traveled. It does capture usage. So from that perspective, if tolling was implemented, and like you said, it's not grandma sitting there collecting quarters anymore, it's a much better system. Certainly support it.
Yes, sir. Two questions, primarily for Joe. Can you give us a concrete example or a guesstimate about what the tolling rates would be? I-70, St. Louis to Kansas City, perhaps, is one. And the second part of it would be, Mr. Toenjes just made reference to CNG. Is there a crisis looming if we, as Boone Pickens, for example, has advocated go to a natural gas kind of transportation system, and all the numbers that we're talking about just become wrong on the low side?
Yeah, well, so the first thing with the toll rate, in other states, it's not it depends on how far you go, what you're driving. Usually, I mean, it can really vary. It's not, I think, like for a regular car, I think for a shorter distance, under $5 is usually the thing. But I mean, the question comes, I mean, some of these toll roads, you go out to places like California, and during peak travel times, they'll raise the prices so they can be quite a bit higher because they're trying to guarantee free flow. So it would be hard to tell without knowing how much it's going to cost. Essentially, there's many different ways you could rebuild I-70. The different cost is going to dictate how much you need to raise in your toll revenue to pay that back. And also, you're going to need to know what are going to be the priorities of the people setting the tolls in terms of what price they want to set. To the second point with the LNG, it's my understanding that at the federal level, they actually have a tax on LNG. So if you were using an LNG truck, you actually will pay a federal tax for how much you use, which goes into the Highway Trust Fund. I don't believe we have that in Missouri, but it's something that you could implement. I mean, it essentially it's higher than the gasoline tax by percentage, I believe. So you're by going the same VMT, you're actually paying a higher tax to the federal government with LNG than you would with gasoline. I don't see why that. It's very similar to gasoline in the way that it's done. So I don't see why that would be such a huge problem, as long as there's flexibility within the state to sort of switch to these things.
My concern is as long as we keep focusing on a fuel tax, you know, a Prius weighs more than an Impala right now, if you look at it. And so think about the wear and tear on the system and think about equity here. And so somehow focusing on this fuel-based system, I think where we're headed in the future is, you're right, it'll last us for 5 or 6 years. It would, and that's been one of our concerns, is a Band-Aid approach as opposed to some sort of a long-term solution.
Then the approach is to tax or fees based upon vehicle rather than what you're putting in.
Somehow.
Such as, I had a student the other day when I started talking about this in one of my classes say, a battery tax, which I thought was kind of the craziest idea in the world, but at least it's an idea. Or you're right, I saw the Prius driving down the road flying past me. I will admit I was on Highway 70 doing probably 75. The Prius was doing, not the Prius, the Tesla was doing 90. Wear and tear on the road without providing anything into it.
And as we
So
come
how
up
do you
with
do
more
that?
and more different fuel systems, you know, who's to know, nuclear or helium or whatever, you can get all these different balkanization of how this all gets paid for.
I would want to point out, though, that getting through the next 5 to 10 years is an important thing. I think if we try to focus too much right now on putting in a system that's going to last 20 or 30 years, technology might overtake us whatever system we put up. So I think doing something now that makes a lot of sense that maybe doesn't last past 10 years is something that we could do while the Oregon studies on VMT go through and we see how they implement.
Why don't you consider raising all three areas?
I'll go back to Prop B when we tried that. Was it because of having to go to a vote of the people? It got extremely confusing for people to understand that. If we could do it legislatively, I think that would be a logical approach, and maybe that's what will have to happen. Is you have to have incremental bites because of the Hancock Amendment. There's only so much the legislature can do, and we've got to have everything go to the ballot, so a confusing ballot issue sinks us.
Isn't that worth thinking about?
Oh, certainly.
Sure.
Got a lot of questions, a lot of hands up. Lee?
Yeah, this is going to take us a moment.
We do have a lot of people. who
Before
want-
this got started, there was a gentleman here who, when talking at the panel, was saying, oh yes, I'm looking forward to the controversy. And I said, I was not. The interstate highway system, the state highway system are absolutely essential to the economy. While we're sitting around here spending the next God knows how many years arguing, because it took at least 4 years to get to this last election, and that failed. And it's going to take at least 2, and I don't know, because it's a presidential election year, perhaps 4 years. Now, MoDOT will tell you that over that 4 years, there's going to be a lot of wear and tear on their roads, for which they don't have the money to necessarily repair or maintain. MoDOT will also tell you that over a 3-year period, let's say that there's supposed to be a maintenance today, and they don't do it. 3 years from now, that maintenance is going to cost approximately 100% more than it would have cost had they done it today.
Okay, do you have a question, Lee?
Okay. While we're frittering around, what are we actually going to do to solve a problem rather than spend intellectually the next 3 or 4 years? Well, what shall we do?
Well, there is money in the kitty right now, is there not? And you were going ahead with some projects and maintenance, of course. We're talking about long-term funding, are we not?
Lee, what I see, pardon me, Greg, but what I see happening, to answer your question quickly, I look at Jefferson County in this last election. Jefferson County had 2 transportation issues on the ballot. They had a local sales tax for Jefferson County that needed renewal to fund the transportation in Jefferson County, and they had the state sales tax. Both sales taxes, one local, one statewide. The state failed, the local passed. And I think that's what we're going to see short term, is we're going to see every little region is going to pass some sort of funding method for their little project and their project in their area. If it's something that, we passed the 1/4 cent sales tax here for Metrolink expansion or for maintenance. City and county, Amendment 7 failed miserably. Jefferson County failed, but the local passed. And I think that's what we're going to start to see short term.
Great.
You had the question about, we have some funds for the next few years, and yes, we do, but we've already, our STIP, our Transportation Improvement Program is 5 years. This year, our commission, we added 25 projects to our TIP this year. We usually add 300, and all of those are preservation type projects, I'll give you a perfect example. Dunn Road, a week ago, our inspectors were up there and found a bad pier. And so we closed it for safety. You won't, like I said, you won't drive across an unsafe bridge. So the discussion is now, it's an 80-year-old bridge. It's right off of 270. We typically would jump in right away, get a contractor on board, get that rebuilt, rebuild that bridge. And now we're like, well, without enough money to maintain our system, is this the priority? Do we look at this? And it's already happened. It's happened here. It's happened in Kansas City. I mean, now we're thinking about 2 years out. It's going to take a while to do these. Are we going to have the funds? And is this the priority that we're going to go to? So, yeah, it's an immediate need, really.
And we passed the 1/4 cent sales tax for Metro when John Nations shut down bus stops. When bus stops shut down and people couldn't get to work, then it passed.
My question is for Greg. We talk about the reality of possibly instituting some sort of toll. Well, in the event that the voters did approve some sort of toll, it's not like we could wake up the next morning and suddenly we're collecting tolls that morning. We'd have to put in toll booths, we'd have to put in cameras. How long would you think it would take it to implement a toll system on a major highway in Missouri from the time the voters said go?
Well, what I see is tolls would be used for specific projects, I-70 across the state. That's what's going to pay for it. And so you build the third lane for I-70, and we can do it for, under about $2 billion, not the fancy one, but the bare minimum. But you could put toll booths in as you build it. You have to rebuild all the pavement. There's 86 bridges on there that you have to rebuild, and as you add the lanes. So you could build it with the project. And that would be a design build that you could do in, once the voters approve that, it'd take probably 3 or 4 years. But it'd be a funding source that we know that that's what it would be spent for, so we would, be able to move forward with that project. So it's job specific though. I don't see tolling everything just to use money for any other thing.
And is this, Joseph mentioned this, but is this being done in other states, the job specific tolling? So I believe you said Kentucky took out the toll booths after
Yes,
the job was done?
Yes, they did that. What you're saying is obviously the toll revenue can be used to finance construction. So really, you can go off of where to go. Once it passes, you can just start construct. Well, you have to plan it, but
approve those funds, or do you need a short-term
sales
tax increase?
No, you just bond.
You bond it, move it forward, and
Yeah.
while you're building it, and then you pay off the bonds with the tolls. This is typically how it happens.
Yes.
Hi, Wood Moore, business person, taught business for a decade at the university, banker, CFO. You guys are talking to yourselves. Until MoDOT stops misappropriating, misapplying the funds, MoDOT underinvests over the last 10 years, and everybody knows, at least people metropolitanly knows, underfunds urban communities where the businesses are by 60% relative to other states. And until you start applying because you accepted double the roads, the rural roads that nobody else did, no other states, you accepted virtually all of the rural roads. And most states only accepted half at best. So the reason why you have 33,000 miles is because you guys just kept taking them on. The Blue Ribbon panel said, don't accept any more roads. 7,000 of your roads are non-federally aided, which is why the federally funding is going down, okay? And after the Blue Ribbon panel said that, they accepted 1,700 more miles, when most states only have 200 miles of non-federally aided. The decision-making at MoDOT is bad for business, really bad for business. Spend most of your money in the rural areas where most of the money comes from the urban areas. And you don't spend the money there. This is bad business, folks.
Do you want them
Really
to
bad.
comment on that, or do you have a question? Bill?
No, they can comment
I would
on
like
that.
to comment on
Sure.
that.
Sure.
You're absolutely right. MoDOT has more state roads. I've talked about it, the 7th largest in the nation. But that was done legislatively 50 years ago. What are we going to do? Give those back to the counties and cities and say, you take over these roads without a funding source?
Why don't you continue to accept them after the Blue Ribbon
Well,
panel?
there again, that's a legislative thing that, it's not MoDOT that says we're going to take on these roads. So the problem that we have now is this is the condition that we have. We have these roads. I don't know how to give them back. I don't think, and it won't be, MoDOT can't say, well, we're not going to take these roads, counties and cities, you take them back. That's a legislative thing. And we can't just say, well, we're not going to do anything on it. They're still our responsibility. So we're kind of in this, I agree with you. We probably have more roads in other states that wouldn't own. Lindbergh wouldn't be a state road, Some of those roads that we have in other states would be county, city roads. But it's not MoDOT that's going to be able to do that. It'll have to take the legislation to say, all right, we're going to give these back. And then if it goes back without any funding source, and if it goes back with a funding source, then we just lose more money with it. So, that's kind of the dilemma that we're in.
Well, and I think that the political reality of when MoDOT accepted those roads is probably part of the reason why Bob Griffin ended up in jail. Is Bob Griffin was working to get a 6-cent gas tax back in 1992. And Bob Griffin went around to every little legislator and said, okay, to get your vote, what do you want? To get your vote, what do you want? And he went around to work the whole legislature, and he got the votes he needed for that 2, 2, and 2. The last time we raised the gas tax in 1992 was 2 cents and 2 cents and 2 cents. The math of what that 6 cents was generating versus the promises that he made to every legislator and taking all those roads and dumping them into MoDOT, he should have been in jail just for that, because the math never worked. It was bad medicine from the get-go, and you're right, we're still paying for it today. Now, how you unwind that from 1992 to now is that's another component of the problem.
Well, until you deal with that,
That's another component of
you're
the
not
problem.
gonna get a, and I said it to the commissioners in January or February, you're not gonna get a tax increase. It's not gonna happen, because the municipal league, despite what you advertise and say publicly when you're leaving rules, municipal league and others know that the money won't go where it's needed. Underfunding urban communities by 60% of the last decade. Won't, who's gonna trust you to put it where it belongs?
I think we had a question back here. Do you still have a question, sir?
Yeah, it seems to me that with all the hybrid and electric vehicles, that's a tactical issue. There are methods of, we should start with principle about whoever uses the roads pays for the roads. If you start with principle, there has to be a way to get these hybrid, we all have to renew our license plates every year. You could get the other vehicles via a fee or an assessment, mileage-based, whatever. There are ways of getting around that. What struck me, because I returned to my hometown after being gone 15 years, when I left in '95, the local sales taxes were around 5%. I get back and they're between 8 and 9%. So irrespective of what your polling shows, if you think that you can get a general sales tax increase to fund a specific purpose of roads, marting these on constantly, folks, that ain't gonna work. That's flat not gonna happen. So I guess my question is, how do we focus on the user fee principle and not stray from that? Because even with fuel economies going up, if a net motorist is not paying any more in dollars, the rate can go up as long as his or her out-of-pocket stays constant or only goes up with the cost of the maintenance. These are not brain surgery type complexity issues, it seems to me.
I'd be interested to know, what did the commission think, the Blue Ribbon Committee that you were part of, what did they think about user fees?
User fees are definitely the way to go. There's no doubt that user fees are the way to go. That somehow, that is the most equitable method. There's this argument that even if I'm in a nursing home and I never get out on the road, somebody's got to bring me my diapers. I mean, they've got to get them there. A truck's got to bring them there. The ambulance has to get to me. The fire department has to get to me. But that's a whole nother issue. I think whether it's vehicle miles traveled, whether it's tolling, whether it's some sort of a system that actually is a per mile or per pound, per mile fuel. I mean, that's the perfect way to pay for it, is a user fee of who puts wear and tear on a system. Of course, then you also end up, as I said, with the public transit issues. Because when you look at the transportation system, you're looking at the roads and bridges, but in essence, you're looking at the whole, every Metrolink ride costs $5 and they're paying $1. So how do you look at the whole picture there in user fees is tough.
Craig wants to say something.
No, I was just agreeing.
You're just nodding, okay. Joseph, did you have something?
Yeah,
you
I
wanted to
have
add to
something
that?
to say. I'll add to that. So yeah, I mean, with the user fees, certainly, I think that there's a whole panoply of things that you could do with user fees. Right now, I mean, like we talk about the future and hybrid vehicles and things like that. Right now, I think that the gas tax is something that is still usable, and we can still be talking, and we should still be talking, and other states are talking and implementing these types of vehicle mile travel systems. That when we see how they operate, I feel like Missourians will then sort of understand them better, and we'll be able to sort of move on to those in the future. And I just wanted to comment on transit. for just a second. I mean, the funding problem with the state road system, I mean, it is a problem with MoDOT's funding. I mean, if you look at transit in St. Louis or Kansas City, they're not in a crisis. They're not about to go bankrupt. They do have their sources of revenue that they are using, and it's not a small amount of money. I mean, I think last year it was around $300 million was spent in the St. Louis area just on transit. So I mean, there's a significant amount of money being spent, and even a lot of people who are in support of transit were not in support of some of these statewide measures, or Amendment 7 especially, to use a sales tax to pay for these sorts of things, because they want to use the sales tax as a source of revenue for transit. They want to be able to go out and argue, okay, we, with our local sales tax money, are funding transit and some of the specific projects we want. So they don't want the state to come down and be like, well, we're gonna tap into that source too, and then maybe give you some transit on the side. So St. Louis, maybe you get a streetcar or something like that, while we use this to plug up the funding hole in the rest of the system.
And I'm on the Board of Citizens for Modern Transit, and we came out in support of the Amendment 7.
Oh, I'm not necessarily the best segue. I'm actually the co-founder of No Mo Sales Tax, so so we probably were on opposite sides of Amendment 7 on this one.
Congratulations.
Yeah, we were proud of what we did.
Yeah,
I mean, not
yeah.
to brag too much, but St. Louis County beat this thing 67-33.
That's right. That's
I bet
right.
that surprised your pollsters. And I'd like some blame for that at some point.
All right, you stuck the needle in now.
No.
I get it.
What I told people when I went out and debated this is that you will not get good solutions until you reject bad solutions. I've watched enough legislation too. We've had bad solutions long enough. It's clear to me that some of these problems, they're not MoDOT problems at all. I never blame MoDOT. I don't blame general contractors. They do a good
Sure.
job building roads. But we got legislative issues, funding issues, trying to struggle with user fees and how to do them in an area with declining use of gasoline, frankly, even though the Prius goes by at 90 miles an hour and is using the road technically more than you, they weigh more. So all these are issues that need to be solved. What bothers me, and I want to get your reaction to this, both of you, because what I reacted to is the culture of the experts. Because you guys are the experts. I'm not an expert on roads. You are. I need solutions from you. Don't sit there, this is the best solution you could come up with? Whoa, I mean.
Well, I will say
That
it
ain't
is.
good.
I will
I'd be
say
fired
is
if
it
I
the
did.
is I will say it was the solution that had the strongest likelihood of success. Do I think it's the best solution?
Politically.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That's not your
Because
job
of you know what?
That's not your job.
The ultimate solution would be if we didn't have the Hancock Amendment and the legislature would take leadership on it and give the people of the state what they need and express some leadership. As long as we continue to, I believe we're on a path to balkanization right now. That's what I believe for the state.
You mean
That's where
taking
we're
the
headed.
roads back to the counties.
Yeah, that
Yeah, I can see that
everybody's going to be doing their own thing. And we're not going to have an integrated system because it's what's in it for me. And I agree with you
Would you
that this
consider
was
that
not
a
that
bad
this was not the
solution?
best
Because
this was not the
Illinois,
best
Kansas,
policy. This was the best politically sellable solution.
Great, did you have anything to say?
Yeah, I would be concerned about, having every little community do their own thing. Every little city did their own thing. How do you have that interconnection? How do you do 70 across the state if, all the little cities, because in the middle, they're not going to spend their money on 70, and that's so important for our commerce. Something like 70 going across the state or 44, they're huge. And so if everybody does their own thing, there's not any overall picture of how to put this all together. That's what would concern me. So I think it needs to be broader than every city and every county running their own tax and doing their own projects. What good is it? They can have they can be fine inside their city, but once they get out, the roads are falling apart. Then what happens?
I'm not an expert,
Yeah.
but I have driven roads in Kansas and Illinois, and those county roads actually do meet up. Okay? I don't know how they do it either. It's a mystery to me.
We've got time. We've got time for one more question.
This is just a general question. I had read in the Wall Street Journal that if the United States started exporting oil and stuff, that our gasoline prices would come down. And I don't know if that's a correct assumption or not, but if that was the case, Could we not take the difference in that somehow and fund the transportation issues that are out there?
I think any way to do it is great. And, Pennsylvania just increased their transportation funding, and they moved it upstream away from the pump to the suppliers. So it's actually at the wellhead or at the distributor level. So that, it shows up at the pump, but they move it upstream. So no idea is a bad idea.
You had a question?
Some are better.
Yeah.
Some bad ideas out there.
I read years ago, I wonder if it's still accurate, that the wear and tear on an interstate highway, a high-speed highway, from a large truck is equivalent. One large truck is equivalent to about the wear and tear from 4,000 passenger cars. Is that order of magnitude?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the heavier vehicles have more wear and tear on it. The trucks do pay higher fees and everything else, the license fees and that kind of stuff.
But does it compensate for it adequately?
I don't know if it's, you might have some more numbers on that, whether it's.
I would like to point, in terms of that, Missouri is actually the outlier in the sense that our diesel fuel tax rate is the same as our regular fuel tax rate. Most states, the diesel fuel tax rate is higher. So, for instance, Kansas, we have the 6th lowest gasoline tax in the nation, but we have the 4th lowest diesel tax. So if you look at Kansas, for instance, they have their gasoline tax regular is about 7 cents higher than ours when you put it all together. But if you look at the diesel rate, it's 9 cents higher. And of course the diesel I believe is also higher. So that's one of those things where I think that Missouri could be compensating more for the trucks than it is, especially if you wanted like some visual example of what the trucks do to the highway compared to a regular car, just one day just switch from the right lane to the left lane on some of those two-lane roads, and you'll notice the left lane is just much smoother. You can almost feel the ruts on the right lane, and that's the truck difference, really.
There's not a trucker in America that doesn't know where to fill up.
This is it, okay.
What's the breakdown of traffic on major highways for regular vehicles versus the multi-axle heavy trucks? Is it 10% trucks?
I would say it's probably 14% on the interstates.
Okay.
You probably know.
Actually do. So if you look at 70 on most parts of, when you get into the cities, it's low. But once you're outside the major cities, on 70 it's about 25%.
Wow. And then let's follow up something you said. When you said that polling was bad for tolls, are you referring to citizens polling on citizens paying, or citizens polling on truckers paying, as you mentioned?
Citizens polling on on toll, the whole concept of tolling.
Which I would assume they're thinking of themselves paying,
Sure.
not other truckers paying.
Sure. Yeah. Everybody wanted the toll booth right past their exit.
Or a toll booth that only hit the trucks that they're not driving.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I want to thank our panelists for coming today and being so patient with us and answering the questions.